What are you doing right now? Seriously, take a moment. If you're like the average American, chances are you're spending almost 4 hours a day staring at a small screen, probably your smartphone.
Hmm.
But have you ever truly wondered about the vast global journey that device or, even the clothes you're wearing undertook to reach you?
Fascinating question, isn't it? And the answer immediately plunges us into the incredible complexity of international trade. Think about an iPhone.
Right. Apple's American, but
Exactly. While Apple is an American company, most of its manufacturing takes place far, far beyond U.S. borders.
And here's a really crucial insight I came across. A study of the iPhone X revealed that out of its, let's say, $800 wholesale price, less than $25 actually stayed in China.
Even though it's assembled there.
Right. Despite being the assembly hub, significant chunks went to South Korea for the display, and chips, raw materials were sourced globally, and get this, over half the price was Apple's profit.
Which reflects their huge investment in R&D and design, of course.
Absolutely. But that single device perfectly illustrates how deeply interconnected our economies are.
It really does. It's a product of an incredibly complex supply chain spanning continents, and it's exactly this interconnected world we're diving into today.
That's right. Welcome to a deep dive into the dynamic and, yeah, often contentious world of international trade. We're pulling out the most crucial insights from the sources you might be studying, particularly drawing from a key chapter in Paul Krugman and Robin Wells's Microeconomics textbook.
Which is really an essential guide for anyone looking to truly get their head around the global economy.
Right.
Whether you're cramming for an econ exam or just, curious.
Our mission today is to distill why countries trade, the sometimes surprising benefits and the often painful drawbacks, how trade policy really works.
And what it all means for you. We'll simplify core concepts like comparative advantage, explore the relevant models, and, crucially, connect it all to real-world examples you see every day.
Yeah, and we'll even walk you through the key takeaways from the charts and tables mentioned in the text so you can visualize the dynamics even if you don't have the book open right now.
And bust some common myths along the way.
Definitely. So let's unpack this journey. Where do we start?
Well, when we talk about international trade, at its very heart, we're discussing imports. That's goods and services bought from abroad, and exports, those sold to other countries.
Simple enough.
This flow is a massive part of what economists call globalization. It's about the growing economic linkages between countries, not just trade, but investment, migration, the whole picture.
And we're not just in an era of globalization. The book calls it hyperglobalization. What's the distinction?
Good question. Hyperglobalization refers to this current, or perhaps recent period, of extremely high international trade volumes. It's been largely propelled by incredible advances in communication, the internet, cheap calls, and transportation. Think container ships, air freight.
That global iPhone supply chain we mentioned.
Exactly. That's hyperglobalization in action. It enabled these really complex production processes to be split across multiple nations efficiently.
So it feels like a very modern thing.
It does, but a longer view shows trade's importance has been growing for centuries. If you were to visualize a chart, say figure 8:1 panel A from the text, plotting world trade against world GDP since 1870,
Okay, what would we see?
you'd see a pretty consistent upward trend. There are dips, of course big ones during the World Wars and the 2008 financial crisis, but the overall trajectory is up.
But you said recent period for hyperglobalization.
Now, what's particularly insightful and maybe a bit surprising is that this ratio of exports to world GDP, while it soared for decades, has actually kind of levels off since around 2005.
Leveled off. Why?
Well, there's even been a bit of a recent shift towards reshoring. Businesses are starting to reevaluate. They're weighing the costs of really long shipping times. It could take a month for a container ship from China to reach the U.S. East Coast against the wage savings of producing overseas. Plus, trade disputes add uncertainty.
Interesting. So it's not just a one-way street towards more and more globalization.
It seems not, or at least the pace has changed. And another key visual, like panel B of that same figure 8:1, compares imports and exports as a percentage of GDP for different countries.
And what does that show?
It clearly shows that trade plays a much bigger role for many other nations than it does for the United States.
Wait, how can that be? The U.S. trades huge amounts.
In absolute dollar terms, yes, we're a giant. But our GDP is also enormous. So as a percentage of our total economy, trade is actually less significant than it is for, say, smaller, more open economies like the Netherlands or Belgium.
Okay, that makes sense. Percentage versus absolute value. So what's the fundamental logic driving all this trade in the first place? It feels like there must be a core reason.
There absolutely is. And it boils down to a concept that's fundamental to economics, comparative advantage.
I've definitely heard that term. What does it really mean in practice?
It means a country has a comparative advantage in producing something if its opportunity cost of producing that good or service is lower than other countries.
Opportunity cost. What you give up to make something else.
Precisely. Let's take shrimp. A lot of the shrimp we eat in the U.S. comes from places like Vietnam or Thailand. Why? Because they have the right climate, the right coastal land. It's just much more suitable for shrimp farming.
So they don't have to give up as much of something else, like growing rice, to produce shrimp.
Exactly. The opportunity cost of producing shrimp there, measured in terms of, say, foregone rice production, is far lower than it would be to try and farm shrimp on a massive scale in, I don't know, Iowa.
Okay, that makes sense for natural resources. But what about manufactured goods, like the iPhone assembly in China?
Great question. It's not necessarily because Chinese workers are absolutely more productive at assembly than U.S. workers. In fact, they might be less productive in absolute terms.
So why assemble there?
Because Chinese workers' productivity in other sectors, maybe like producing heavy machinery or complex software, is even lower compared to U.S. workers in those same sectors.
Ah, I think I see. So even if they're slower at phones, they're really much less efficient at making, say, trucks.
You got it. That means the opportunity cost, what China gives up in terms of potential truck production to assemble phones, is comparatively lower than the opportunity cost in the U.S. The key insight is always who gives up the least of something else to produce this specific good.
That's slightly counterintuitive but powerful. It's not about being the best, but being the least bad at other things.
Kind of, or having the lowest relative cost. To illustrate this clearly, economists use simplified models. One classic is the Ricardian model of international trade. It makes a simplifying assumption, constant opportunity costs.
Which means the production possibility frontier, the PPF graph, is a straight line, right? Not bowed out.
Exactly. So imagine figure 8.2 in the text. Two countries, the U.S. and China. Two goods, maybe phones and those big Caterpillar heavy trucks. The U.S. PPF might show it can make, say, 100,000 trucks if it makes zero phones, or 100 million phones if it makes zero trucks. The slope tells you the opportunity cost. Let's say it's Microeconomics 1,000. To make 1 million more phones, the U.S. has to give up 1,000 trucks.
And China?
China's PPF might show it can make maybe 50,000 trucks with no phones, or 200 million phones with no trucks. Its slope might be, say, -250. To make 1 million more phones, China only gives up 250 trucks.
Okay, so the cost of phones in terms of trucks given up is way lower in China.
Precisely. And if you flip it, the cost of trucks in terms of phones given up is way lower in the U.S. You can see this summarized in Table 8-1. The U.S. opportunity cost for a truck is 1,000 phones. China's is 4,000 phones.
So conclusion, U.S. has the comparative advantage in trucks, China in phones.
Exactly. Now think about autarky. That's the situation where a country doesn't trade. It has to produce everything it consumes somewhere along its own PPF. Maybe the U.S. makes 50 million phones and 50,000 trucks. China makes 100 million phones and 25,000 trucks.
They're self-sufficient but limited.
Very limited. But here's the magic, the crucial insight. The gains from international trade come when each country specializes.
So the U.S. focuses on trucks, China on phones.
Yes, according to their comparative advantage. Then they trade. Look at figure 8-3. It shows how trade allows both countries to consume outside their own PPFs.
Wait, how?
Because specialization increases total world production of both goods. The U.S. makes more trucks than it needs domestically. China makes more phones. They trade the surplus.
And both end up better off.
Significantly better off. Cable 8-2 lays it out. Compared to autarky, both the U.S. and China can end up consuming more phones and more trucks. In the example numbers, they might each gain 25 million phones and 12,500 trucks.
Wow. So trade literally makes the pie bigger for everyone involved. It liberates countries from just consuming what they can make themselves.
That's the fundamental benefit. Now, the actual price they trade at, say how many phones per truck, gets determined by international supply and demand. But it has to fall somewhere between their individual opportunity costs for trade to be beneficial.
Got it. This seems so beneficial. Why is trade often controversial? Maybe we should tackle some common myths.
Absolutely vital. First, remember, it's comparative advantage, not absolute. China's lower wages don't necessarily mean exploitation. They often reflect lower overall productivity across their economy.
So the lower cost of making electronics there is because the alternative uses of that labor are even less productive compared to alternatives in the US.
Exactly. This directly counters the pauper labor fallacy, the mistaken belief that rich, high-wage countries automatically lose out when trading with poor, low-wage countries.
Because both sides gain based on their relative efficiencies.
Right, both benefit. The lower-wage country exports things where its cost advantage is greatest, which is
Hmm.
usually tied to that lower overall productivity level reflected in wages.
And what about the sweatshop labor argument? That trade exploits workers in poor countries.
That's a really sensitive and important point. The argument is that the jobs created by trade in poor countries often have low wages and poor conditions by Western standards.
Which is often true.
It often is. However, the crucial economic point is comparing those jobs to the workers' alternatives within their own country, which might be even worse: subsistence farming, dangerous informal work, or unemployment. For many, these sweatshop jobs, however imperfect, represent a step up.
So it can still raise living standards overall.
It often does. Look at Bangladesh's clothing industry. It has faced legitimate criticism over conditions, but it has also lifted millions out of extreme poverty and significantly boosted the country's standard of living. It's a plex.
Now, there's a chart in the text, isn't there, about productivity and wages globally.
Yes, the global comparison box. It plots labor productivity, like GDP per worker, against wages across many countries for a year like 2018.
And the takeaway.
A very strong positive relationship. Countries with higher productivity generally have much higher wages. Think Japan, maybe 66% of U.S. productivity, around 68% of U.S. wages. Some variation, like Iceland having higher wages than productivity alone might suggest, but the trend is clear.
So low wages in poorer countries mainly reflect lower overall productivity, not necessarily just exploitation through trade.
That's the primary driver, yes. The low wage advantage is often balanced out or it's explained by this lower overall productivity.
Okay, so we understand comparative advantage is key, but what causes these differences in opportunity costs beyond just general productivity levels?
Good question. Economists point to three main sources, really.
Number one.
Differences in climate. This is the most obvious one. Tropical countries grow coffee, bananas. Temperate zones grow wheat, corn. You can't easily grow bananas in Canada or wheat in the Amazon rainforest.
Even seasons matter, right? Like getting grapes from Chile in the US winter.
Exactly. Seasonal trade is a big part of it.
Okay, climate. What's next?
Second, differences in factor endowments. Factors of production are the basic inputs: land, labor, physical capital, like machines, buildings, and human capital, education, skills.
And endowment just means how much of each factor a country has.
Right, relative to other countries. The Exer-Olin model builds on this. It says countries tend to have a comparative advantage in goods whose production is intensive in the factors they have in relative abundance.
Intensive, abundant. Break that down.
Okay. Factor abundance is just having a lot of a factor compared to other countries. Canada is abundant in forest land. China is abundant in less skilled labor. Factor intensity refers to which factor a production process uses more of. Oil refining is very capital intensive, needs lots of expensive machinery. Making clothes is typically labor intensive.
So Canada, with lots of forests, exports forest products. China, with lots of labor, exports clothes.
That's the prediction, and it holds up pretty well. Canada exports timber and paper. China exports apparel and assembled electronics.
Does a country have to completely specialize?
No, international specialization is often incomplete. Countries usually produce some amount of most goods, but they tend to export the ones fitting their factor endowments, and the gains from trade still happen.
Makes sense. Is there a third source?
Yes. Third is differences in technology. Sometimes a country just develops a better way to produce something.
Like a new invention or process.
Exactly. Think about Japan's auto industry in the 1970s and 80s. They pioneered lean production techniques, making high-quality cars very efficiently. That gave them a huge comparative advantage for a while.
But others caught up.
Yes. Eventually, other countries' automakers adopted similar techniques, closing the technology gap. Technological advantages can be temporary, but powerful while they last.
The text also mentions something about scale effects.
Ah, yes, increasing returns to scale. That's another driver of trade, especially between similar developed countries. It basically means, for some industries, the more you produce, the lower the average cost productivity rises with output.
Like building jumbo jets.
Perfect example. The development costs are astronomical. Only a couple of companies globally, like Boeing and Airbus, can operate at the necessary scale. So the U.S. exports Boeings, Europe exports Airbuses. Same for complex financial services concentrated in hubs like New York or London. It explains why similar countries trade so much specialized stuff with each other.
And comparative advantage can change over time, right? There's an example about Hong Kong.
Right, how Hong Kong lost its shirts box. It's a great illustration. Hong Kong rose to prominence, making clothes a labor-intensive industry. It fit their factor endowments at the time.
But then,
As Hong Kong got richer, wages rose, land became expensive, and its economy shifted towards higher-value services like finance. Its comparative advantage moved away from simple apparel manufacturing.
so other places took over.
Exactly. Figure 8-4 shows this visually. You see Hong Kong's share of U.S. apparel imports dropping sharply after about 1989, while Bangladesh's share rockets upward. Bangladesh had become the place with the comparative advantage in low-cost garment making.
Hong Kong's garment industry was a victim of the city's success, as the book puts it.
A perfect phrase for it. Shows how dynamic these advantages are.
Okay, so we know why trade happens. How does it actually affect markets within a country? Let's bring in supply and demand.
Right. So in any domestic market without trade, you've got your standard supply and demand curves. Where they intersect, that gives you the price and quantity in autarky. Remember, no trade. Let's call that price PA.
Okay, the price before imports or exports start.
Then you introduce the possibility of trade. The key factor becomes the world price, PW, the price at which that good can be bought or sold internationally.
And what happens depends on whether PW is higher or lower than PA.
Exactly. Let's take the case where the world price is lower than the domestic autarky price, PWPA. This is a situation for imports.
Like TVs or shoes in the US, maybe?
Could be. If you look at figure 8-6, it shows what happens. When trade opens up, no domestic seller will sell for less than PW, and no buyer will pay more. So the domestic price falls from PA down to PW.
And at that lower price.
Domestic consumers want to buy more. Quantity demanded rises. But domestic producers want to supply less. Quantity supplied falls. The gap between what consumers want and what domestic firms supply.
It's filled by imports.
Precisely. Now, figure 8-7 shows the impact on welfare consumer and producer surplus.
Okay, walk me through that. Lower price. Good for consumers, bad for producers.
Exactly. Consumer surplus increases significantly. They get the goods cheaper and they buy more. Graphically, they gain areas labeled X plus Z. Producer surplus decreases because they sell less and at a lower price. They lose area X.
So producers lose X, consumers gain X plus Z.
Meaning the net effect for the country as a whole is a gain in total surplus equal to area Z. Consumers gain more than producers lose.
That's the crucial point for the economics, isn't it? Overall gain.
Yes, but politically, it's vital to remember who gains and who loses. The gains to consumers are widespread but maybe small per person. The losses to producers are concentrated in specific industries and can be devastating. That drives the politics of trade protection.
Okay, what about the flip side? Exports. When the world price is higher than the domestic price, PWPA.
Right, think U.S. agriculture or aircraft. Figure 8-8 shows this. Now, the domestic price gets pulled up from PA to the higher world price, PW. Why sell domestically for less if you can get more abroad?
So higher price means domestic consumers buy less.
Quantity demanded falls, but domestic producers, seeing that higher price, want to supply more. Quantity supplied rises. The difference now,
Is exported.
you got it, and figure 8-9 shows the surplus effects. Producers gain massively, areas X plus Z from the higher price, and increase sales volume. Consumers lose surplus, area X, because they pay more and buy less.
But again, producers gain X plus Z, consumers lose X.
So the net gain for the country is again positive, equal to area Z. Producers gain more than consumers lose.
So imports or exports, the country as a whole generally benefits in terms of total economic surplus.
That's the standard economic conclusion, yes. But the distributional effects are real and significant.
Let's talk more about those. How does trade affect wages specifically? Income distribution.
This ties back to the Heckscher-Ohlin model and factor endowments. Trade tends to increase the demand for a country's abundant factors of production and decrease the demand for its scarce factors.
And demand affects price. So wages are prices for labor.
Exactly. So trade tends to raise the price, wages, of the factors a country has in abundance and uses intensively in its exports. And it tends to lower the price, wages, of the factors that are scarce domestically and used intensively in the goods the country imports.
So in the U.S., we're considered abundant in high-skilled labor, human capital.
Generally, yes. and relatively scarce and low-skilled manual labor compared to many developing countries.
So trade should raise wages for high-skilled workers here.
Because our exports, like software, aircraft, financial services, use a lot of skilled labor.
And lower wages for low-skilled workers.
Because our imports, like clothing, electronics assembly, furniture, tend to be intensive in low-skilled labor. So yes, trade is seen as one factor contributing to rising wage inequality within the U.S. over the past few decades.
Even while it might reduce inequality between rich and poor countries.
That's the complex picture, yes. It can compress global inequality while potentially widening it domestically in richer nations.
The China shock mentioned in the text seems like a case study of this.
A very powerful and intensely studied one. Between roughly 2000 and 2007, U.S. imports from China just surged, went from under 1% to over 2% of U.S. national income. A huge, rapid increase.
Driven by China joining the WTO and getting better technology.
Largely, yes. And the impact was definitely dual.
Good for consumers.
Absolutely. Prices for things like clothing, toys, electronics fell significantly, or rose much slower than overall inflation. Consumers benefited broadly.
But the bad side?
It hit certain U.S. manufacturing sectors very hard. Clothing, furniture, basic electronics. Estimates suggest maybe 1 million U.S. manufacturing jobs were displaced specifically due to the surge in Chinese imports during that period.
And the impact wasn't spread evenly across the country.
Not at all. Figure 810 highlights this. It shows how employment in communities that were heavily reliant on the industries facing the most intense import competition. Think furniture towns like Hickory, North Carolina, where maybe 1 in 6 workers were in that industry, saw sharp drops and stagnation in overall employment.
Even while the national economy might have been growing overall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It underscores the devastating localized impact that can happen, even when the national picture shows net gains or job growth elsewhere. It's easy to see aggregate data, harder to see the concentrated pain.
Which naturally leads to calls for protection.
Precisely. Given these concentrated losses, it's no surprise that governments often face pressure to implement trade protection policies designed to limit imports and shield domestic industries. This is the opposite of free trade, where the government ideally doesn't interfere.
What are the main tools of protectionism?
The two most common are tariffs and import quotas.
A tariff is just a tax on imported goods, right?
Yeah. Yep. Slap a $100 tariff on a $200 imported phone, and it now costs $300 in the domestic market, assuming the world price doesn't change.
What does that do? Figure 811 shows it.
Right. The tariff raises the domestic price from the world price, PW, up to PW, plus the tariff, let's call it PT. This higher price incentivizes domestic firms to produce more, and it makes consumers buy less. Imports shrink.
Okay, so it protects domestic producers somewhat, but what's the overall economic cost? Figure 812.
This is key. Figure 812 breaks down the welfare effects. Domestic producers gain surplus, area A in the diagram, because of the higher price and quantity. The government collects tariff revenue, area C.
Exactly so far.
But consumers lose big time. They pay a higher price and consume less, losing surplus equal to areas A plus B plus C plus D.
So consumers lose A plus B plus C plus D. Producers gain A, government gains C, the net losses.
Areas B plus D. This is the deadweight loss of the tariff. It represents the value of lost beneficial trades, consumers would have bought more at PW, and the cost of inefficient domestic production, producing goods at home that could have been imported more cheaply. Total economic welfare shrinks.
Okay, that's tariffs. What about quotas?
An import quota is a legal limit on the quantity of a good that can be imported. Say only 1 million foreign cars allowed per year.
How does that compare to a tariff?
It has very similar effects on price and quantity. By restricting supply, it drives the domestic price up, reduces overall consumption, increases domestic production, and shrinks imports, just like a tariff that would achieve the same import level.
But there's a difference in who gets the money.
Crucial difference. With a tariff, the government gets the revenue from the tax. With a quota, the price difference between the world price and the higher domestic price creates a profit for whoever holds the license to import. This profit is called quota rent.
And who gets those rents?
Often, it's the foreign governments or foreign exporters who are allocated the import licenses. So, if you look back at Figure 812, if Area C, the equivalent of tariff revenue, goes to foreigners as quota rent, the net loss to the domestic economy is even larger, Areas B plus C plus D.
So quotas can be even worse than tariffs for the importing country.
Often, yes, from a national welfare perspective.
There was a recent example with steel tariffs.
Yes, the 2018-2019 U.S. steel tariffs. The Trump administration put a 25% tariff on imported steel. Figure 813 shows exactly what theory predicts.
What did it show?
U.S. steel prices jumped way above world prices right after the tariffs were imposed. Then, when they were later removed for some countries, the U.S. price fell sharply back towards the world price. Clear evidence that the tariff raised prices for domestic users.
Winners and losers.
Winners were U.S. steel companies and their workers, who saw higher prices and maybe some temporary job gains. Losers were all the U.S. industries that use steel: automakers, construction, appliance manufacturers who faced higher costs, and ultimately consumers paid more for goods made with steel.
If protectionism generally leads to these net losses, why does it happen so often? Politics.
Absolutely. It's all about the political economy of trade protection. There are several common arguments used to justify it.
Like national security.
That's a classic one. Protect domestic suppliers of goods deemed essential for defense, like steel or maybe medical supplies, as we saw highlighted during the pandemic. The limitation is this argument can be easily overused for industries that aren't truly critical.
What about creating jobs?
The job creation argument is very persuasive politically. Tariffs do tend to create or save jobs in the specific import-competing industry. But economists argue this is usually offset, or more than offset, by job losses in other sectors.
Yeah, so
Higher input costs, like steel tariffs hurting automakers, potential retaliation from other countries hitting export industries, and consumers having less money to spend on other goods because they're paying more for protected items. But the jobs saved are visible. The jobs lost elsewhere are often harder to pinpoint.
and the infant industry argument.
The idea that new domestic industries need temporary protection to grow strong enough to compete internationally.
Sounds reasonable.
In theory, maybe, but in practice, it's hard to execute well. Governments aren't great at picking winners. Protection often goes to politically connected industries rather than true infants. And temporary protection has a bad habit of becoming permanent because industries get used to it.
So the real reason for protectionism often isn't these justifications.
Often the reality is simpler: political influence. The producers in an import-competing industry are usually a relatively small, well-organized group with a huge amount at stake.
Yeah.
They lobby hard for protection.
While consumers.
Consumers, who bear the costs through higher prices, are a vast, diffuse group. The cost per person might be small, making it hard to organize effective opposition. So the concentrated benefits to the protected industry often outweigh the diffuse cost to everyone else in the political arena.
The example of solar panel tariffs in 2018 showed that, right? Helping a few thousand producers but hurting tens of thousands of installers.
Exactly. A classic case of concentrated benefits versus diffuse costs.
Given these pressures towards protectionism, how do we maintain relatively free trade?
Through international trade agreements. These are essentially treaties where countries mutually agree to reduce tariffs and other barriers against each other's exports.
I agree to that.
It helps lock in the gains from trade and, crucially, helps prevent trade wars, where countries get into damaging tit-for-tat cycles of raising tariffs against each other. Most world trade today operates under the rules of these agreements.
There are regional ones.
Yep. Like NAFTA, now updated as USMCA, between the US, Canada, and Mexico, and the European Union, EU, which is much deeper. It's a customs union among 27 European nations with common external tariffs and many shared rules, even on things like migration, which led to huge debates like Brexit.
And global agreements.
The big one is the World Trade Organization, WTO. It oversees the major global trade agreements signed by most countries, provides a forum for negotiating further reductions in barriers, and importantly, has a system for resolving trade disputes between member countries.
Like the U.S. versus Brazil over cotton subsidies.
That's a famous example the text mentions. The WTO ruled against U.S. subsidies, leading to changes.
Does the WTO have an army to enforce its rules?
Huh? No, not at all. Its power relies on member countries agreeing to abide by the rules when they join. Joining means accepting constraints. You give up some sovereignty, agreeing not to raise tariffs beyond certain levels or impose quotas arbitrarily. But countries do it because the benefits of a stable, predictable global trading system are usually seen as worthwhile.
But trade wars still happen.
They do. The text has a box. Trade war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing, usually. It defines a trade war as when countries impose tariffs specifically to inflict economic pain and force concessions.
Like the chicken war back in the 60s.
An amazing historical example. A dispute over European tariffs on U.S. chicken led the U.S. to impose a 25% tariff on imported light trucks in 1964. Incredibly, that temporary retaliatory tariff is still in place today and has shaped the U.S. truck market for decades.
Wow. And more recently.
The U.S.-China trade war that started around 2017 is the big contemporary example. The U.S. put tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods. China retaliated, often targeting U.S. agricultural exports, because that hits politically sensitive states. It creates huge uncertainty and potentially long-lasting damage to trade relationships.
So, despite all the benefits economists talk about, globalization is facing some challenges.
Definitely. There are rising concerns and second thoughts, even among proponents.
What are the main worries?
One major one we touched on is the decline of manufacturing employment in richer countries. Imports of manufactured goods from lower-wage countries clearly put downward pressure on the wages of less skilled workers in places like the U.S. and Europe, contributing to income inequality.
And it's not just manufacturing anymore,
Yeah.
outsourcing.
Right. Offshore outsourcing, where companies hire people in other countries to do tasks, has moved beyond manufacturing. Think call centers in India, software programming in Eastern Europe, even reading medical x-rays remotely.
So this starts to affect higher skilled workers too, people who thought their jobs were safe from foreign competition.
Exactly. Computer programmers, accountants, radiologists, jobs that require significant education are increasingly part of global supply chains. While outsourcing is still a smaller fraction of trade than goods, it hits a different group of workers and fuels anxiety about globalization's reach.
So what's the bottom line? Is globalization good or bad?
Well, most economists still firmly argue that the overall gains from trade significantly outweigh the losses. The pie gets bigger. But, and this is a crucial but, we have to acknowledge that the gains aren't evenly distributed, and the losses for specific groups can be severe and long-lasting.
So policy needs to address those losses.
That's the argument. If we want to maintain political support for generally open trade, which does create overall benefits, we'd likely need stronger government programs, things like unemployment benefits, affordable health care, job retraining assistance, to help cushion the blow for those who are displaced or negatively affected by trade. Managing the downsides is key to sustaining the upsides.
So we've covered a lot from why trade happens, the gains, the models like Ricardian and Hexer-Olin, the impacts on markets and wages, trade policy battles, and the current challenges.
It's a huge topic, but hopefully breaking it down makes those core concepts clearer. Understanding comparative advantage, opportunity cost, and the effects of imports and exports on surplus really is fundamental for any economics student.
We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of international trade, its incredible power to create wealth, but also its controversies and its real impact on people's lives and jobs. Essential stuff for your courses or just for understanding the world.
So next time you pick up your smartphone or think about where your food or clothes come from, maybe pause and consider this. How will this ongoing dance, this tension between the huge benefits of global trade and the very real, localized challenges of economic disruption, how will that shake the world you live in over the next few decades?
It's a big question with no easy answers. We hope this discussion has given you some tools to think about it more clearly. Keep exploring, keep questioning. On behalf of the Last Minute Lecture team, thank you for joining us.